And good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Moffat on Money. Joined tonight by Miss Jane Post, serving instead of E-Train, who is still in the process of moving and is still without internet reception at the house. So she is hanging out at a Mexican restaurant with quote unquote decent reception. But Jane's going to be helping us out tonight. Excuse me. As usual, we're broadcasting over YouTube, X, and Rumble. For those of you joining us on X and Rumble, we appreciate you being here. If you have some questions or comments, then throw them out. They don't show up directly in our feed, but Jane will relay them.
I'll be doing the Ellen things. Maybe not as good as Ellen, but I'll be doing the things.
So we appreciate you being here and stepping up on late notice.
No problem.
And hey, Melissa, how you doing? Good to see you. Family's having another reunion tour tonight. And for those of you new to the show or watching it for the first time, we do have a little family, and people we know and love, and who support us and encourage us, and we're just grateful as hell for them. So, just a little family. I hope everybody has had a good week. It has warmed up considerably down here from what it was. We were getting up near 70 2 weeks ago. It was trying to kill us with the snow and the blizzards, which we are not accustomed to. So I live on the beach, or a few blocks off of it, and just 3-4 inches of snow on the beach. It's just kind of a weird sight. So
it's 28 here. I'm jealous. But I'll be in Dallas on this week. So I'm leaving on Tuesday. So I'll be in Dallas.
Business and pleasure.
80 degrees. Business.
Okay. Well, it's still 80 degrees after 26 is, yeah, moving in the right direction.
Some warm weather.
I do like the change of seasons. I admit, when it gets down to 20 and dark and dreary, whatever, overcast, I'm thinking I'm ready for summer. But I love the spring, everything blooming. I love the fall with the change of the colors and the leaves and the cool breezes. So, and winter with the new snow, it's pretty.
It is. This year's been pretty good. Like it always snowstorm Farm Show week here in Pennsylvania. So Melissa knows, she used to live here in Pennsylvania. So we had a little bit of snow, but it's all melted now. It's getting up into the 40s during the day. And then we're still chilly at night, but February is coming, so we'll probably get some snow. Yeah. Then spring's going to start coming.
Yeah, here January and February are the only 2 months that really, it gets dark early. It's overcast a lot. It's generally rainy and cold. But March, things start warming up, and it just starts turning pretty and nice. So can't complain with that.
I miss the sun, but we're past the, those 6 weeks, 8 weeks where it's just so dark at like 4:30 at night. Yeah, Ellen was saying it's a roller coaster there in the South this past week or two.
It has been. I mean, it was last week. Not this week, but the week before, it was, 20, 22 degrees.
Right.
Now it's 70 during the day.
I'd take that in a heartbeat.
But it's hard to get adapted. By the time you start getting used to one, you got the shift, and it's just adapting to it's a little rough. I lived up in Chicago for a winter.
Woo!
Yeah, that was ugly. It didn't matter what I wore. It was cold to the bone, but at least, except for the really windy days, you could get adapted to it.
So Melissa's reminding us tomorrow's Groundhog Day. So Punxsutawney Phil is in, of course, Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. He will be on the internet. So let's hope he's going to forecast an early spring.
How good of a job does he do? I've never really tracked his
We think it's the handlers messing it up. I think he was more accurate before they did the show, and then they put him in the fake tree up on the stage and stuff. It's still fun. It's still fun.
It is. I love the little traditions. E-Train, Clay, you're freezing as in screen. Noticed I was having some issues earlier, and I tried changing the Wi-Fi, and I just tested the speed. It seems good enough to do okay, but
you are frozen on the other streams, and you're pixelated. I can still hear you. At least you're not Alvin today, so that's good.
Progress. I don't know if I'll ever live that down.
It was great. It was the best stream ever.
But tonight, hopefully, we've got an interesting show for you. We are going to be talking about changes in the world, a new paradigm, new rules being applied to the old system. We've seen it in a rather impressive or amazing way this week. So we're going to talk about Doge. We're going to talk about the tariffs and DeepSeek. And I couldn't really think of any other title other than what the hell. So let's begin. We're going to start off talking about the tariffs, to the surprise of some, and some actually were surprised. Trump did what he did what he said he was going to do. He announced tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China's close behind. He hadn't formally put them on China yet, said they're still in negotiations. But the reasons he gave were their failure, particularly Mexico and Canada, their failure to control the border and the fentanyl coming across, which is interesting because I don't know really how much fentanyl comes across from Canada. I've kind of seen some things from, my Canadian friends. They are under the impression that not very much, but I haven't seen good numbers, so I don't know. But he slapped Canada and Mexico with a 25% tariff, and he's highly likely to follow up with one on China. He has threatened rates up to 60%. Wow. But that's still in negotiations. And you got to keep in mind with Trump, everything he says publicly, it's the start of a negotiating position. The guy loves to negotiate. And so he establishes a kind of a hard, I guess I could call it extreme position in order to try to get movement in the other party. So we'll take a look at some of these measures combined with his deregulation efforts, his promises or goals to reduce personal income taxes, and discuss their impact on everyday Americans, on you. And yes, of course, we will address the inflation debate. I've seen all sorts of dire predictions coming out as far as how these tariffs will impact inflation. And, my background is in finance, and finance is a subset of economics. I've spent a fair amount of time studying it, and I also love history. So went back and took a modest look at Trump's first term, because he had implemented tariffs on China and Europe, even Canada, and to see what their impact was. Well, despite some claims, inflation in 2018, if you'll notice this chart, was only 1.9%. The year before he took office, it was 2.1%. So he enacted the tariffs in 2017. The economy grew a little bit faster at 2.5%. And in 2018, when everything was in full force, inflation dropped to 1.9%, and the economy continued to grow. The third quarter, it grew near 4%, 3% for the year. And this was when the Fed then started hiking rates because they were worried about inflation. Inflation didn't actually start or crank up, but the Fed saw the economy expanding rapidly and wanted to try to tamp it down a little bit. So they started hiking rates. And you can see the rates went from 0.75% to 2.5. They first started hiking at the end of 2017. So that's a little history. We had
a question, Clay, real quick from Harrison. Hello, Harrison. Welcome to the show. Let me put the question up on the screen. There you go.
Let's see. Does Doge potentially reduce inflation if the agency is effective enough? That's a good question. And going to talk about this a little bit later. But in short, tariffs increase the price. My point is a little technical in that I don't consider tariffs to be necessarily inflationary. Tariffs will raise the price of an individual product or products, just like they did in 2017 and 2018. But they don't necessarily generate inflation, which inflation is a systemic event. It's in the whole system. It affects all products, all different goods and services. And inflation is always, always, always a monetary event. Monetary meaning government spending too much, and then having to print money to pay for the debt that they generate. So if Trump puts a tariff on, Chinese component used in cars, that component will become more expensive, but as far as its total increase in the price of a car may not be noticeable.
So what about, because he's now putting tariffs on Canada, is that going to impact lumber? Because I think we get a lot of lumber from Canada.
We do. There's different angles to that. If something is imported and it's used, you got to keep in mind that the U.S. has a huge ability to produce everything. We have chosen not to.
Correct.
And so if there's, some price increases in the goods, that's more incentive for Americans to restart production or to begin production. A lot of lumber mills in the U.S. shut down during the pandemic.
Correct.
And so that increased our dependence on Canadian lumber even more. So if the price is up and it looks like it, is sustainable, then that'll probably encourage some of these old lumber mills or somebody to buy these old lumber mills and try to, start them back up. Because we have an abundance of timber, just like Canada does. And it's kind of hard for me to imagine how Canada can cut the timber, process it, and then ship it all over the U.S. cheaper than we can cut down the timber, process it, and ship it to the state next door.
I would think wages are pretty comparable to the U.S. in Canada, or at least from what I see with my job, that typically our wages are similar. So that does surprise me.
Yeah. And, some of it is due to regulations, restrictions on cutting timber or managing wildlife areas. Some governments have taken wildlife areas out of the timber business. So there's less available land to harvest. And we've seen the results, for some of that in those type of management practices. It makes wildfires more likely. It makes them harder to contain. They burn hotter, spread faster. So past may not be prologue in terms of if a lot of that remains. Again, everything is changing right now. So if we look, kind of getting back to history, we had tariffs, but
Right.
the price increases didn't pass through to the whole economy. Well, let's look at some specifics why. China's products. China needs to export goods to the U.S. We are far and away their largest importer.
Consumer, yeah.
They need to export so badly, and this was 5 years ago. They needed to export so badly, they devalued their currency. They lowered its exchange rate to the dollar.
But that's normal for them. They're constantly playing with their
They do
currency.
play with their currency.
When I was
But
a
the net
product line
effect to the American
controller,
consumer was that they ended up absorbing the cost of the
correct,
tariffs.
it would play havoc on my P&L because you're having this wild ride with the currency conversion. So you could always tell they were, especially with steel when we were trying to buy steel and stuff.
Right.
They would play with it constantly. So I don't see that as anything different than what China's always been doing, manipulating their currency.
No, they always have to their advantage, so to speak.
Correct.
But in doing it because of the tariffs, it hurts them because they're receiving fewer dollars per unit. And so it costs them. They're actually, quote unquote, paying for the tariffs.
Right.
Now, if we move forward to today and look at, China and its need to export to the U.S., the Chinese economy is weak, extremely weak. Their real estate market is collapsing or has collapsed. There is increased discord in the cities among the young. They've got people who aren't getting paid.
Oh, wow.
They can't find jobs.
They
And
can't find jobs? Really?
No.
I mean, you have population collapse there. So how could it be that they can't find jobs when you have population collapse? So there's less kids to fill the jobs.
Well, because the economy is that poorly managed.
Wow.
Under Xi, he took office in 2011?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
And before his term, China had been moving toward more independence in their markets, and they obviously had experienced great economic growth. Well, Xi is an old Maoist, and he has been continually trying to reinstitute some of the Great Awakening, not Great Awakening, what Mao call it? I forget the term, but their policies have becoming more and more centralized and controlled and directing economic activity. And it hadn't worked out well for them.
Mark to the show. We have Mark Miller joining us, and I put the question up on the screen for you.
Okay. If tariffs are placed on a key good like food, if that was something we imported the vast majority of, then would it not eventually systemically inflate prices due to a chain reaction? With food, we produce most food domestically, but like out of season foods, we import. Like grapes in the winter come from Chile. So if we put imports on a country that's a large food exporter, yeah, the price of that food will go up. The thing is, again, America has the ability to produce most everything. And secondly, consumers that are price sensitive, which, is the average American, will oftentimes choose substitutes. They'll buy something if they see it really cheap in the grocery store. They won't buy it if they see it as expensive. So if they're not buying it, it really doesn't add to the cost of living if they go for substitutes. And a lot of items in food are substitutes. The core ones, meat, eggs, cheese, basic vegetables. If those saw dramatic price increases like we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years, the cost of food will soar, and that will contribute to a rise in inflation. Fortunately, most of those countries are not the target of tariffs. Most of the tariffs in the past, Trump didn't put tariffs on everything. He would exclude some critical supplies, like all of our antibiotics come from China.
80% of all pharma comes from China.
Yeah. We don't produce antibiotics in this country. So those were excluded last time. But the thing is, we have manufacturing plants. We could start manufacturing those. They're just low margin products for most of them. And so the pharmaceutical houses, find it a little bit more efficient to ship it overseas.
Doesn't RFK want pharma made here now too? If he gets in, now? Doesn't RFK want our drugs made here as well? If he gets in as HHS?
Yeah, we can control the quality, we can ensure the quality better. Plus, it ends our dependence on other nations for critical goods, and that's kind of a big goal of the administration. So, kind of bottom line, there is going to be some, I don't know how else to word it, chaos, confusion, difficulty with products and supplies. The main thing is 2 years from now, will we be better off? Will we have more of this critical supplies manufactured in the U.S.? Will manufacturers move manufacturing plants from other countries back to the U.S.? Will it create more jobs?
But do we have people qualified to take those jobs?
That's a good question. And, that kind of goes back to the deportations and immigration. We historically, and I was going to talk about this a little later, but we historically give, let me get to Ellen's comment. Depends. China will subsidize the cost of the tariffs without affecting the American people. I believe China will continue to do that because they need our imports more than ever. They need the business more than ever. Their economy is really struggling.
Well, I noticed with Temu now, they are trying to have local warehouses in the U.S. With that. So I don't know how that's going to work on their marketplace platform, but they are starting to bring more U.S. companies online to compete with Amazon.
Yeah, and Trump says any product made in America will not be subject to the tariffs, just if it crosses the border and is imported. So if they're manufacturing the product in the country, they can get around the tariffs that way. And, honestly, I've said this kind of, through the years, probably on the show before, but some of the importation of goods doesn't make sense to me, like T-shirts. We grow the cotton here in the States, ship it over to China, where they turn it into T-shirts. They stamp the T-shirts and then send the T-shirts back, sell them for $10, $15. That just, the transportation, the shipping, all that, the middleman just doesn't make sense, particularly with automation now. We already grow the cotton, we harvest it. We can convert it into textiles. We can print it and do it to me, T-shirt manufacturing, it would be much more efficient if it were regional. You wouldn't have all the transportation costs across country. And you could have a little plant, not much bigger than a large house, producing 1 million T-shirts a year.
Really? Yeah, I guess so.
So you literally could have regional T-shirt manufacturers with, computers that will print a different pattern on the T-shirt at the flick of a button. Print 1,000 with this pattern, 2,000 with this pattern, 1,500 with this pattern. And automation will enable huge efficiencies where the efficiency we received from moving manufacturing overseas is just a lower cost of labor.
So Ellen was saying too many regulations on building the die, the air quality. But I did think Trump was saying he's going to try to roll back some regulations. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, originally he stated a goal of cutting 10 regs for every new one implemented. And, it doesn't make any sense. We have the strictest environmental regulations in the world. And so we won't allow manufacturing T-shirts here. But, kind of cliff note Ellen's E-Train's point, we won't allow the manufacturing of it here. But no, we'll allow the manufacturing of it in a foreign country with far, far worse or lax environmental policies. If we allowed the manufacture here, it would still be much cleaner than if it were anywhere else. So we just need some common sense. And money, when issues of money start hitting people's pocketbooks, it kind of forces more common sense than they would have otherwise. And I think people are getting more and more demanding of their politicians in terms of starting to demand more accountability and more common sense.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're not completely there yet. You've still got a lot of vestiges of the old, government can do anything as long as it's for the right reasons. I think people are starting to care less and less about the high flighty goals and starting to care more about the actual effects and impacts. I'll tell students that their goals are irrelevant, that what really matters is how their ideas, their ideology impacts people's lives. You can say you're doing this for the people, but if it makes them poor, if it increases their pain, if it increases their misery, you're not really doing it for the people. You just sold it as that package. And I think people are starting to become more and more critical in their review of some of these ideas, ideology, arguments, and demanding more accountability. At least I hope it's trending in that way. I believe it is. And I hope it continues. E-Train. Do you think government should subsidize the ISO regulations to bring manufacturing back to the U.S.? What do you mean when you say subsidize the ISO regulations? I'm not sure about what you mean by that. ISO. Give me a little bit more detail on that, if you would, please. In the meanwhile, we were talking about the tariffs as implemented versus the tariffs of 2017. Ellen, what's ISO, please?
The International Standards Organization. It's what they put in for shipping. I mean, manufacturing. They have the standards that you have, like ISO, what is it? 2000, 7000, one of those numbers will tell you how you manufacture a product, your standards. Okay. It's a manufacturing term.
If what they ought to require is that any manufacturer who imports something to the U.S. meet the same standards as American manufacturers.
9,000, ISO 9000, I think it is.
Because it's just almost irrational to say that American manufacturers have to meet these standards, but Chinese don't. So, some of the standards, like the Paris Accords, Trump has just pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Accords, which basically constrained the U.S. to higher environmental standards and made it pay basically a carbon tax to China, who doesn't have the same standards. So, a lot of these regulations or whatever are very, very one-sided. They hurt American manufacturing, but they encourage foreign manufacturing. That's got to change. I don't think, thank you. International Standard for Organization. Thank you. I don't think the government ought to subsidize manufacturing. I don't think they ought to subsidize any particular industry or field, because if government subsidizes something, they control it. And we've all seen how good of a job government does at controlling most anything. But the government's job to me is just to ensure a level playing field, that Americans and American producers have the same opportunity as anybody else, and don't have to, China, solar panels. How many people have solar panels or something? Something solar. Most people do, whether it's even, a little device or whatever.
Calculator.
Well, the U.S. started solar panel manufacturing, developed it. We led the world. Well, China copied our manufacturing techniques and formulas and started producing them as well. Then the government subsidized those solar panels for export to the U.S. They were literally giving them away, or very, very cheap.
They were.
And so they put all the American manufacturers out of business. And as soon as the last one went out of business, they jacked their prices up.
Well, who couldn't see that coming?
Yeah, that should not happen ever. So that's what I say, that's what I mean when I say Americans ought to be able to compete in a level playing field. I take our chances. You don't need government to subsidize it, but you do need government to ensure a level playing field. The U.S. government says you have to be an ISO X in order to manufacture X product.
ISO, yeah.
Yeah.
It's health, it's safety, it depends on what you're doing. Like when I worked for a manufacturer, I do think it was 9,000, but don't quote me on that. It was 7 or 9. And it's like how we made was Danfoss. So how we made the components or how we made the compressors, right? They had standards. And we had an ISO compliance officer that made sure everything maintained those standards.
Yeah. It's kind of coming back a little bit.
It takes a minute.
Yeah, usually I've thought of ISO standards as in ensuring weights and
it could
quality labeling.
It could depend. There's a different number for each industry. So that's what Ellen was saying, 2, 3, 5, 7. It depends on what industry you're in. That will tell you what your ISO is, right? And how you're going to handle it, how you're going to handle safety, how you're going to do quality.
Yeah. So, I would just think or prefer that government ensure a level playing field rather than government try to, because regulations are control.
Correct.
It's just an extended form of socialism. Now, let's be very clear. Socialism is an economic term. Socialism, communism, capitalism are economic terms. They describe different types of markets, and it's really pretty simple. Capitalism, otherwise known as free markets, is where you have a willing buyer and a willing seller. They're both free to engage in the trade or not. There's no compulsion, no pressure. If they negotiate for a product at a price that they're both happy, they can do the deal. Free trade. Socialism is where the government controls production. So it can control the production. A lot of people think it's through only outright ownership. But fascism and Nazism, Mussolini developed fascism. And he described fascism as a perfect marriage between a few corporations and government. So basically, his idea was a few big, large corporations would work closely with government in controlling the economic production. They would have government support, backing, influence, whatever, and it was just a friendship. Nazis, same thing. Uh, they still had quote unquote private ownership of the production companies, but only Nazis were allowed to own it, and they were told what to produce by the government. So, Nazism, fascism, socialism, they're all the same kinfolk. So, control of production. Communism is control of production and of demand. Not only do they tell you what you have to produce at work, they tell you what you can buy at the store, what's available. So there is no competition. There's no alternative products. So in that regard, government regulation can become, now you've got to have regulations to ensure safety and a fair playing field, a level playing field. But that doesn't control production. And the more government gets into, there's a gray area. The more government gets into regulating business and what you produce, the more socialist it becomes. There's an area where it's not, there's an area where it is, and then that transition in between is great. I would obviously favor and think consumers would be better off more shaded toward less regulation, ensuring only safety and disclosure of contents, material, whatever.
So given the above, should the government subsidize the ISO regulations or just kill the regulations?
I don't think they ought to kill them. I think they ought to require everybody to follow the same standards. So if something is imported, the importer has to verify that the manufacturing process, plant, etc., complies. And that plant ought to be open to random inspection by inspectors authorized by whatever government agency is in charge of that particular area. Like overseas pharmaceutical manufacturing should be able to have an American inspector go and examine the plant and make sure that, the health standards, the quality standards are all being maintained. So, and if if things are too expensive in the U.S., then they'll be manufactured elsewhere. But I think with the U.S., it's like the T-shirts. It just doesn't, to me, make any sense to send the money and the capital and the cotton overseas, have it processed and manufactured, and then ship it back. There are ways now to avoid not having the transportation costs. Being in close proximity to your market is a huge advantage. Not only that, they can respond faster if you're closer and local. You can catch trends. We've all seen like memes.
Right.
They spring up overnight. Well, what if you had a little plant and you could capture that meme and start producing shirts the very next day and get them out to the market in a day or two?
I think there is a company that does that for different YouTube creators. I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but
yeah.
And they'll also do the shipping. So depending on where you are in the world, they'll do small batches and then they do the shipping too, so that it's local shipping. You're not paying, Europe to ship something from the US to Europe or vice versa.
And that takes weeks and months. Correct. So, there are huge efficiencies by having it local. You don't necessarily need the huge unless you're manufacturing, cars or something. You don't need the huge manufacturing plants that, we grew up with. Automation, miniaturization, computerization all allow much higher efficiencies than what we had 20 or 30 years ago. But most people in manufacturing are still operating off those same paradigms that shaped manufacturing 30, 40, 50 years ago. Overseas inspections are too corrupt. The Americans do inspect. They inspect some. I'll agree with you completely on corruption. Our whole government has become so corrupt. Obviously, I was talking earlier about how Americans are, I hope, demanding better accountability in their government.
I think they are. I think that was sort of the mandate with the elections of, let's clean things up. Let's, the inflation's out of control, debt's out of control. I mean, eggs are $8 a dozen now. I mean, that's insane.
And I hope the voters hold them to that. They ran.
Well, I think they are. I think, as you see these nominations, I mean, I think a lot of people are behind RFK and just the attacks against him. I mean, I think he got Bernie Sanders great, right? And then Bernie's like, just the individual people. Oh, no, only 1.5 of the 200 million.
Yeah, I got to admit, if somebody had told me a year, 2 years ago, I was supporting RFK, I would have just had to look at him.
Right.
But, the fascinating thing to me about this, why I call it a paradigm shift, is because our political leaders for decades have been just generally butting heads, at least publicly. And then they kind of work underneath the surface to, do some things. But anyway, I can't say it's really been looking after the best interest of the American citizens.
No, I agree. I think, Thomas Massey was the one that was talking about them trying to print money. And he's the only one coming out saying, they're doing it behind closed doors in the middle of the night. You all need to know what's going on, right? That, all of a sudden the Union Party was, and he was the only one speaking out. And look at the mess we're in now.
Yep.
I liked his example with the tea, where he puts water in the tea and explaining about diluting the currency.
Yep. But now a different paradigm has emerged. You've got RFK, who does not agree with Trump on certain economic or domestic issues or some spending issues and priorities, but he is completely in lockstep with him on health, medical issues. And
but don't you think it's good that Trump has someone who'll challenge him, that they don't agree? I think he'll thrive in that, right? Because Trump's a businessman, used to negotiating and used to listening to different points of view. Whether or not he agrees with it, he'll listen. Yeah. I think that he's putting a cabinet together that's not afraid to stand up to him, and they can butt heads and come out what's best for the people.
Trump is always like that, but he wants it in private. In public, he demands public loyalty. But the thing is, 4 years ago, you would have never had Trump and RFK. Now, they're like, we agree on this. You're the best man to do that particular job. And he hands it off to him. And
isn't that what we need? Is you have the best person for the job at all the jobs. You don't ever have, no one agrees 100% on anything, right? But you want the best person that has whatever job they are. You want the best quality candidate in there or person.
Yeah, but it's just, to me, it's a different paradigm, because now you've got people that I would have described on the far left working with people on the far right to accomplish a common goal. That's the way it should be. We're both like, yes, this would be good for the people. Let's do it. And RFK, during the interviews, RFK was asked some questions of his particular positions, and he would just say, the president's position is this, and I support the president.
Mm-hmm.
He had opportunity to go off on some other courses or tangents, but
his life's work is to make, to protect people. I mean, his whole career, he's done the environment and health, right? And like he said, this is his last chance. He's 70 years old now? Yeah. This is his last chance. I mean, I think it's good that Trump has people from different parties.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's a great thing. I just am surprised that it finally happened. because 4, 5, 10 years ago, it would have never happened.
Correct. Well, look at John Fetterman. I mean, he says, I represent all Pennsylvanians, right? Look, I from somebody who has a brain injury myself, I get on people like, look, he's there, right? His is more obvious than my brain injury, but he's there and he's willing to compromise. He went to Mar-a-Lago, and for him to say, I represent all Pennsylvanians was really good. And he is still in the middle. And I will say, being a Pennsylvanian during the pandemic, he showed up every day to work. When the Republicans in our legislature were screaming him down, he still went every day. You got to give him credit for it. So I see, like, I think people are starting to shift now. Hopefully people are kind of shifting back towards the middle now so that we can begin to compromise again as a nation.
And I will say this, I would want it towards the historical middle, which historically, which now would be considered almost right or far right.
Well, because they pulled
ideologies have shifted so far to the left that the middle now is still far left, still big government, high taxes, that kind of thing on the ideological spectrum. But I think pendulum's starting to swing back. So
it always does. When you go too far one way, it's going to swing back too far the other way.
Yeah, E-Train, does anybody know what happened to Massey's wife? He hasn't disclosed, and I don't think anybody's asked anymore. I think it's just between him and his family, and he just wants it left there. So, do not know, but
yes,
so he's back at work.
So Ellen's talking about the Sean Ryan show and his interview with Gary Brecka. And it's mind-blowing as far as health and healthcare that the number 3 leading cause of death is modern healthcare. Yes, Ellen, that's why I'm an herbalist. So what did I say? We take 90% of all medications taken in the United States.
Yeah. And most people don't understand, but healthcare for decades has been, I can't say responsible for, but a big contributor in cases to death. You go to the hospital, you're sick, and you pick up a staph infection that ends up killing you. If you had stayed at home, you probably would not have picked up that infection. Being given wrong drugs, being over medicated contributes a lot.
Well, what about the side effects? People don't think about the side effects. They give you one drug, then they got to give you another one to treat the side effects of the first one, and then they got to give you a third one to treat the side effects by the other two.
Exactly.
It's insane. It's insane. Really insane.
People don't appreciate the balancing act that medications, like anesthesia. It's exactly what you were talking about. They give you one thing to create one effect, and then they have to counter some other effects by giving you other drugs. And it's a very, very delicate balancing act. That's why it's so complex. And sometimes it doesn't work out well. E-Train, the info Brecka had from working as a human biologist for an insurance company. He can look at your health record and predict the month when you'll die.
Oh, I believe that 100%.
Can he predict the year?
Actually, I think they can. I think they have records that good. If they look at especially what medications you're on. Look at what they're finding out now with Ozempic. It's causing people are taking that, and now they have brittle bones and things like that. Osteoporosis at a very young age. It's bad.
Yeah, now you can avoid that. You have to increase your calcium intake and exercise to keep your bones and muscles somewhat stretched or stressed. So part of that is just, again, bad medicine, bad practice of medicine. Every drug, most every drug has some side effect, Some of them are very minor. Some of them are not necessarily minors. And it depends on the person. There are drugs that will affect people from different races different ways. People from different, people with different genetics, it impacts them differently. So we, as you mentioned earlier, we are far and away too over medicated.
And even everybody, the stuff they allow over the counter, like what they don't tell you is ibuprofen will kill your liver. And then they put it over the counter and people are taking it and then having all these liver issues. Yeah. Because they're just not realizing that, it's over the counter. It should be safe, right?
I used to just take a handful of them and chew them at times.
Oh, me too. I would mix.
It was just, it was like a vitamin.
Or you mix them, because they found if you mix them, you can do just as good as morphine. If you do, I think it's a Advil, a Motrin, and a Tylenol. And if you take 3 of them together, one of each, right, every 4 hours, they're saying it's, in most people, it's just as effective as morphine. So yeah, I would have migraines and stuff, and I would be taking them by the handful. And not good for you and your body.
No, and even herbs can have, reactions or side effects. You really shouldn't.
This one you should never take with anything else. Can you see it on the screen? This is St. John's wort. Now, they do use this in Europe for mental health. People have mental health issues, but this will react with every single medication on the market. So you don't take this with anything else. So yeah, herbs can be just as unhealthy if you don't know what you're doing with those.
Yeah, we need to get doctors that are far better informed. And I remember when my undergraduate's in biochem, and I was going to med school for a year. But anyway, I was, back then they were talking about having a pharmacist accompany the doctor on their rounds as they were prescribing meds.
I had 2 uncles that were pharmacists, and they were lobbying Congress that doctors should not be prescribing medication, that the doctor should work with a pharmacist, because I can't tell you, he would tell me how many times, both of them, how many times a doctor would write a prescription. And that's why they always say only use one pharmacy, because they wouldn't know, they didn't know that another doctor maybe prescribed something would cause a stroke or something else.
Well, even at that, some doctors, there's so many different meds. There's so many medical publications and new compounds coming out that it is almost impossible for any doctor to stay on top of everything. The way doctors learn is the pharmaceutical rep, salesman comes into his office, gives him a 5-minute spiel about the drug, leaves him a bunch of samples. And, the doc decides based on that 5-minute spiel whether or not he thinks it's advantageous, but he's not well informed.
Oh, I started out in pharma years ago. I did the commissions for pharmas, and they would make $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. That was, before the opioid crisis. So yeah, they were giving that stuff out like Tic Tacs and selling it. And doctors would just take whatever they gave them and whatever they said so they could get the free vacations to Hawaii or the different prizes that we would give them, with no thought whatsoever of what they're doing to people or the side effects of these drugs.
It is enough of a load for them to try to stay on top of their specialty, much less keep up with all the pharmaceuticals. Now, E-Train had a comment, methylene blue. We were talking about this the other day. Somebody recommended methylene blue to me.
It's synthetic, but they've known for years the benefits of methylene blue. Yeah.
But the thing is, I take pills to sleep at night. Otherwise, I don't sleep. And they impact the serotonin receptors. And so it could have, if I took that with methylene blue, it could have adverse impacts.
Yes, you could. And we can talk offline about what herbs and stuff you can do for sleep, because there's herbs you can do.
Yeah. But, the only reason I knew that was because I researched it myself.
Yeah,
So,
they'll never tell you that. I mean,
yeah.
And I'm constantly, as you know, as an herbalist, is constantly reading and researching, and two, just because it works for one person doesn't mean it works for you. Each herb that you take, or each cocktail of herbs, has to be tailored to you, to what you need at the time. And if you're taking it for a brief period of time, right, you might not need that 3 months from now. You might need something else or nothing at all. So just like with the pharma, even with the herbs, they have to be regulated, and you have to watch them and watch the interactions and pay attention to that, the same you would with a pharma.
And how many people know somebody that they can go to that knows this information and you can get good advice? Very, very rare to find somebody like that. And so
Yeah.
we've got to encourage people to start doing more of their own research. Particularly with AI, there's a lot more and better information
Well, I
available.
would not trust AI with that, Clay, because remember, AI learns from the information that's given to it, right? How do you know that information isn't biased? You
Well,
don't.
the thing is, they're making a lot of, and I was going to talk about that a little bit. With it was Grok and Perplexity, where doctors, would quiz them with patients' symptoms and would upload either an X-ray, high-res X-ray, or a video of an MRI. And
Oh, yeah.
Grok was knocking out the diagnosis. It was able to read the MRI. I don't know if y'all have seen a
I did.
video of an MRI, but it's a live kind of moving X-ray of like your abdomen. And it was, correctly identifying the parts. It picked up some inflammation in the pancreas. It noticed the pancreas was swollen and indicated that was, had a 95% chance of being pancreatitis, which had been, based on blood lab work, et cetera, diagnosed. Well, Grok didn't even have access to the lab work, and it's making correct diagnosis.
But
So,
that's something physical. To me, that's something physical, not biological.
no, but the thing is, it's information, and the more they train the AI, the better it's going to get. Now, you pointed out that AI makes a lot of mistakes. No argument. AI is not the end all. But in
Correct.
terms of being able to gather tons of information and compile it, that's really what it does or is for. So you still have to read through it and evaluate the information.
But even then, some of the sources are not correct. I've tried it a few times and found that the information isn't even correct. I was watching, it was a couple months ago, Emily Baker, the law tuber, the law
Right.
nerd, where lawyers were using it to find cases, right? They're like, okay, it would scan the library. It just made up cases. And then they presented it to the court, and the
Yeah.
lawyers got in serious trouble. So it had the correct database. It was going through the law database, but it still made up its own cases based on what it extrapolated from the law database and not giving them what they want. And the judge said, you still need to check. So
yeah, AI is like an infant.
correct.
It's just in its, prepubescent stages. It's only going to get, better and more accurate. Nice hat, Jay. Nice high roll. But the simple fact there's the old computer saying GIGO.
Yes,
Garbage in, garbage out. Right now, AI doesn't discern well between garbage or non-garbage, or hasn't. It's improving, and it's starting to learn to verify sources. It's comparing information and how it's received from is the information it received, is it in peer-reviewed journals that, are there other articles contradicting that? It's starting to be able to gross all the research on a particular topic. So it is, and it's not really an intelligence, it's an information aggregation system.
I agree. It is not intelligent. It's only as good as if you put biased data or incorrect, and that's what it learns from, then you will get incorrect out. Yes, I agree.
So instead of me trying to hunt and peck and find 15 or 20 articles on a topic, I can use AI, let it find these articles and present it in one stream. And then I can read through it. I can click on the individual article, go read that article if I want to. So I use it for and I recommend it just simply for information aggregation. Kind of a one-stop, quick shop to find the body of literature on a current topic.
I am shocked as a professor you would say that. To me, I see it as wiki. Like a wiki. You don't use wiki for school.
You do though. Wiki sometimes has factual information. You're still responsible to verify it.
Correct. Trust but
just
verify.
Like it's an information source, and anybody that's interested in information will use any information source. I'm very much opposed to, we used to call it shooting the messenger. The key is we need to be able to look and evaluate the information and see whether or not it has merit, whether it has credibility, whether it's just presenting one side or partial information. That's the process of reason. That's the process of analyzing data. But the source of it is not as important as the information gleaned. So if I'm looking for information on a historical event, battle at Chart or something, I might be a little fuzzy on the details. I might go to Wiki and read the description real quick. Got no problems with that. But if I was going to write a historical novel about it, would I use Wiki? No. Hell no. I'd be traveling over there and going through some of the ancient libraries and files and going to the battle site and trying to reposition, the movement of the armies, etc. It's just a whole different level. A couple comments. Let's see.
She's just on.
This might be the best one. Sweet hat, Jane. For those of you who do not know, we, Moffat on Money, we have these hats, and Jane is very graciously displaying one right now with kind of the motto of the show, stupid. Let's do this. Stupid should hurt. So, we will have some more of those in stock before long. So if you're interested in one, want to order one, let us know. You can email us at moffatonmoney at gmail.com. And while we're, taking a little break here, do the YouTube-y things for us, if you will. Hit the like button, the subscribe button, do all that kind of stuff. It helps us out. We appreciate it very much.
Repost it on Twitter or X.
Yeah, give us a repost, if you will. We love you. Ellen, me. Not sure what she was mean about. We've kind of gotten
that was a while
covered
ago.
A range of topics. But
I put them up. I don't know if you noticed. I've been putting them up as we've been chatting. Yeah.
Sometimes, Ellen, I don't pay attention to the screen so much. I'm just in my own little world or thoughts. So E-Train will shout out at me, Jane has a question or comment. So just yell at me. I've been married before. I know how to shut up and do what I'm told.
Ellen, watch the language. I'm putting that up. I'm not going to be the one that gets the video taken down.
So, all right, back to tariffs. We've been talking about a lot of things, but we're talking about, are tariffs necessarily inflationary? And in history, generally they're not. They would have to be extensive, pervasive, high, with no substitutes. And that's just pretty rare. We saw how Trump during his first term implemented tariffs in 2017, and we saw the inflation rate in 2018. And we talked about how, individuals oftentimes can utilize substitutes or simply not purchase the higher priced items. There are items that I have found out through the years that are made with slave labor or child labor or from certain countries. And I have tried, insofar as I can, to no longer purchase products that utilize that labor or from that country. And it really hadn't hurt my standard of living. I really can't think of anything that I have missed not buying those products, not contributing to such. In fact, it makes me actually feel better not buying or consuming those products. So this obviously lessens any economic impact on households as well if they choose substitutes. Now, an additional impact of the tariffs, or goal of the tariffs, is to keep U.S. production in the U.S. and to relocate production to the U.S. So if you're going to look at the proposed tariffs, you have to look at them in context. And that context would have to be accompanied by deregulation and personal tax cuts if you want to determine the impact on the average American. Throw in more good jobs, you've got some pluses there. But if we look at some of the numbers, for example, energy is about 13% of GDP. Imports are about 11% of GDP. Now, Trump has repeatedly stated the phrase "drill, baby, drill." And if you look at U.S. production, U.S. oil production has risen, but the number of producing wells has fallen by a third. So what's basically happened is late in Trump's last term and the first 6 months of the Biden administration, a lot of new wells were approved. The Biden administration cut off approval for any new wells in August of 2021. But up until then, a bunch had been approved.
Question. Is this now why they're sending stuff to the Gulf of America, Mexico, whatever you want to call it? Is this why now they're sending assets to there? Is it only in the Gulf there that they're going to drill new wells, or also are they going to do it in other areas such as Alaska?
They will do it all over, anywhere.
Now, my understanding. It's not gas grade, or what are we going to do? We're selling that to the other countries, and is right. I guess this leads to bricks. Is he going to shatter bricks now?
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Let me delay some of that. In terms of the quality of oil, most of the oil mined in the U.S., Jan has a good point. Most of the oil mined in the U.S. is the heavier oil. It's good for lubricants, motor oil, those kind of things. It's not as good for gas. But the point is, the key is it can still be used. It still can be fracked for gas.
Oh, really?
It's just a little bit more expensive. So normally we will trade off with other countries who produce a lighter, sweeter crude. We'll trade them our heavier oil so they can get lubricants, and they'll trade us their lighter crude to use for gas. So it does, end up helping. But if the number of rigs is falling, sooner or later, oil production is going to drop. And so, Trump's unstated goal is to reintroduce capital investment into U.S. oil development. There really has been very little money spent on new oil fields or new oil development in the U.S. in the last 4 years. So that has got to change if we are going to be able to keep some form of energy independence. If the U.S., shows that it is interested in expanding its energy production, if the Chinese economy continues to weaken, then the supply of oil and energy will increase. Natural gas, oil will increase, and the demand for it will decrease.
Right.
So it is feasible to imagine the next few years where oil price drops. Right now it's, let's say, 75, 77 a barrel. If it drops to, I was just playing with a few numbers, if it drops to around 55, 50 a barrel, that will probably take 1.5% off of the inflation rate.
Nice.
Because energy costs are such a huge contributor to everything that's produced and transported.
Correct.
So there are trade-offs to be made here. Yeah, we might see a little bit higher prices on tariffs. Some of that will be consumed by exchange rate fluctuation. Some of it could be offset by decreases in energy cost. So there are trade-offs to be made. In terms of, jobs and workers, a lot of people are concerned about the deportation causing a shortage in workers. We'll ask them which jobs mostly they're talking about, because if you follow this channel or some of the information, most of the jobs numbers, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, who's responsible for producing the jobs payrolls numbers, most of the numbers they have produced for the past several years have been mythical. Remember, they overstated them by 880,000 jobs this year alone, 2024 alone. The simple fact is, over the past 2 years, we've lost about 1.5 to 2 million full-time jobs. We've gained about 1.8 to 2.2 million part-time jobs. That's not real economic growth. So there's still a lot of Americans out there without good jobs. Okay. Now, the vast majority of those being deported, according to the administration this week, 97% of those being deported already had deportation orders issued against them. It's just the Biden administration never deported them. It allowed them to stay. So it just ignored the rulings. Now, I will also admit I have worked in and funded millions of dollars of investment in the San Joaquin and Coachella valleys. I understand the need for migrant workers to harvest the crops. Americans, by and large, won't. I remember we had an asparagus field, and the law was passed where you had to have, as an employer, you had to verify that the people you were hiring were legal, either had a green card or, Social Security number, American ID, American citizen. So we thought, okay, we'll do it right. We'd been paying the migrants probably $4 or $5 an hour to harvest asparagus, which when it's ready, it's backbreaking work. You bend over with a knife, cutting the stems, putting in a bag, just go up and down the rows all day long. 100-degree, 105-degree temps. So we thought, okay, we'll try to do it right. So we ran an ad, $18 an hour, and this was in the mid-'80s. $18 an hour. That was good money back then.
Yes.
The first day, we had 100 people show up, mostly Americans. By the end of the day, we had 2 left. The next day, we had 0 show up.
You didn't hire farm kids. That's
No.
what it is. I remember having to go out, and our parents would send us to, different farms to help harvest the different stuff all summer long. And then we'd get like 2 crates of whatever, like we were harvesting for that week or whatever, sent home so our parents could can it. But weak our people.
But the practical reality is that, the San Joaquin Valley is the size of the state of Alabama.
Right.
And you've got migrant camps that literally start in the south end, harvesting the crops, and then just move north. The growing season, the harvest season, just coincides almost perfectly with this. So they just literally keep moving north to harvest the crops through the season.
You would think that the government would pass like a worker pass where they could come in, maybe pay some kind of tax, a 1% or 2% pass, but have a worker or a day pass where they come and work so that they could still come here and work.
Well, that's my point. It can be done legally. Sure. With legal importation, temporary cards are granting green cards, but you control who you let in. You allow in law-abiding people who will follow the laws, who will help build the country and not take advantage of its citizens. We don't need a border where sex traffickers, gang members, drug runners can cross at will. We have more people wanting in the country than we can handle. So we can afford to be a little picky. We need to keep the gang members, the drug runners, the sex traffickers out. We need to ensure that children are with their parents, not some guardian who will then take them and disappear into the ether after they're released. We need doctors and engineers, all we can get, but we have historically made it difficult for them to enter. I'll have kids, graduate students, international graduate students who are smart, who are effective communicators, would make great hires for American companies, but they don't have a green card and they can't get one without a job. They can't get a job without the green card, and the green card costs $30,000.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that much. Wow.
So, these well-educated people who could get good STEM jobs or high-paying analytical jobs have to leave. Meanwhile, the borders are open.
Companies send to pay and bring them in?
Do what?
Is that why then companies will hire them over there and then bring them in on the work visas? So the company's paying for the visa, not the person who doesn't have a job but needs a job to get all of that.
Yeah, and the visa's temporary. They still have to end up applying and trying to get a green card. So most companies will not pay for the green card. It's just too expensive.
Right.
But it's ridiculous that we penalize what could be very productive people while we incentivize people who are more interested in undermining society. It's just a screwed up immigration system. It needs a major overhaul.
So Melissa is saying, yes, companies will pay for the visas, but if you lose your job, you also lose your visa. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, and I think the visas have a time limit.
I think it depends.
If
they want to stay, they can. I think if you're in, like when I worked for Danfoss, some of the Danes got to stay longer for whatever. It was a business need, right? That they needed to be here so they could stay. But a lot of them did end up getting their green cards, yes.
Yep. So, that's a big context to consider the net effect of tariffs on individual households. Combine that with potential income tax cuts, and that the probability is that you'll have more after-tax income. then you have higher prices due to tariffs on imports. So net, you'll be better off. The idea is that tariffs aren't acting alone on the economic stage. There's a whole cast alongside of them. And, I was, trying to look for and examine regulation cuts. And so I got this image pop up, a variety of regulation cuts. So if you go into the Marines, these are the acceptable haircuts that meet regulations. So there's my regulation cuts. Image for regulation cuts. Anyway, I saw that maybe. Yeah. So a big focus of the administration is the cutting of regulations and cutting personal income taxes. They've already trying to propose or include no taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security. And I think Massey has already proposed a bill to end the income tax. Somebody did. I forget who. I think it was Massey.
I think you're right. I think it was Massey.
So, keep in mind, when I talk about regulatory cuts, regulations are a tax. Regulations are a hidden tax. They increase the cost of production. They limit competition, which increases the price to the consumer. Imagine you're managing a household budget, which is probably not hard for most people to manage. To imagine. But on one side, you get a nice tax break that boosts your monthly disposable income. And on the other side, you're hit with slightly higher prices on certain imported goods. Remember, only 11% of GDP is imported goods.
So, question on that. So Trump proposed the External Revenue Service because of these tariffs. Right. So how would all of that play in there? So they're going to get rid of the IRS, right? And then, so we won't have to pay, but we would still have to pay for like Medicare, like Social Security, right? So wouldn't you still kind of need the IRS? Or are they saying all that's going to be funded by the external tariffs? Or you don't know?
There hasn't been great clarity on that, particularly with regards to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Right.
And I'm not sure, there's been some estimates that a 25% tariff on all imported goods would come close to replacing the current revenue generated by personal income tax. That doesn't include the Medicare, Medicaid, just personal federal income tax.
Right.
The flip side is Doge. And we really haven't talked about Doge. We will shortly. So I'm going to defer that part of the conversation.
Okay.
Try to stick just to the impact of regulatory cuts. But like I mentioned earlier, the goal of the administration is to cut 10 regs for every new one they issue. Well, think of it as kind of like going out for a meal and you get a generous appetizer discount, but then the entree has a small surcharge. Overall, while the tax cuts and deregulation measures are aiming to try to, one, stimulate economic growth, and they do that by increasing individuals' disposable income, the tariffs, while not triggering runaway inflation, do kind of, pinch a little bit in terms of extra cost on specific items. Now, how that will exactly all play out, I could throw out numbers and estimates, but it'd just be a wild guess. There haven't been good details released on the extent of the tariffs, the pricing of the tariffs, the impact of regs being cut, or personal income tax cuts. So it's just all guesswork now.
Right.
But again, I go back to 2017 and 2018. The tariffs weren't highly inflationary because of a number of reasons, changes in exchange rates, substitutes, these kind of things. Now, inflation, systemic inflation. I always argue that or point out that it is a monetary event. Monetary being the government prints more and more money. It does this or has to do this to pay for its spending when it doesn't raise enough taxes. Well, one thing the administration is doing, Doge, is looking at cutting the size of government, not just regulations, but personnel. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but this week it came out that Musk and his staff have taken over the empty Office of Personal Management building, OPM.
They took over OPM? Wow.
Yeah, so the building was empty.
So did he move? So is Elon Musk moving to DC, at least temporarily? Because I thought he took up residence in Mar-a-Lago.
No, he is, well, he's got offices all over. So he travels a bunch, but they literally have moved in. Okay. They literally have moved sofa beds into the OPM building.
Wow.
And the staff there, he brought us a group from X. Mm-hmm. Many of the same folks that helped him, fire 80% of the Twitter employees.
Right.
And they're going through OPM's records.
Wow.
They have changed because nobody was in the building. Everybody was working from home. So they have changed all the security keys. They've changed all the computer passwords, and they have cut off remote access. So the previous employees can't get into the computers or in the building. They are ripping through personnel records, looking at compensation, employee ratings, and I think most importantly, production. Who during the past 4 years has been productive and who hadn't?
Okay, full disclosure, I am a full-time remote employee, but I do work more.
Yes.
When I'm home.
Some do. Many don't.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's the maturity level and what you could do. Obviously, if my people aren't getting paid, I'm not working, right? Or if I'm not answering those questions, they know I'm working. But, to give remote workers a bad rap, I mean, come on. I'm not near an office. My whole company is remote and it works really well. And I mean, I understand what he's doing, but there are people who are working remote and being successful at it. So, I mean, do I think
I am not indicting. I am not at all indicting all remote workers. But the statistics are pretty clear. Most companies are trying to get workers to come back into the office because on average, they are more productive.
Well,
there are many that don't handle the workload as well at home.
Well, I feel like I work more from home. So I get up at like 5:30 in the morning. I'm on at 6. I'll work till.
Don't make this personal.
No, I'm just saying, like,
I'm just talking about the statistics.
Why I bring this up is because I feel like when they started allowing people to work from home, you work more because, well, can't you take that call with Europe at 6:00 in the morning? You work from home, right? Can't you stay a little later, or can't you do that report on the weekend? Because you work from home and you're not getting the coffee breaks. Like most times, if I start at 6:30, I might get lunch by 2:30. And I mean, I have literally worked straight through to 2:30. So I think it's a two-way street in that company.
Again, don't make this personal.
But I know a lot of people do that. I know.
Just talking about the data. And you look at most of the large companies, they're trying to get their employees back in the office. The reason is they're having falling productivity.
I almost would go back in if we had an office close because I feel like I would work less hours because I would commute there in the morning. Yeah. I would chit chat in the morning while I'm getting my coffee, sit at my desk, go on a bathroom break, chit chat while I'm in there, come back, do an hour lunch. I feel like I would only work 4 hours a day versus the amount of hours I work now.
But most companies are having employees come back in the office because they get better productivity.
I guess it's the quality of who you're hiring to work from home, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
The expectation, I think you have to set an expectation too.
I can't address any individual. All I can do is look at the raw data. Now I talked about how they were sending out, pink slips as well. Right. One casualty that, was just announced was the CEO of the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm all for audits. I'm a finance person. I want everything auditable.
Yeah, this guy is basically a mid-level bureaucrat who was being paid $10 million a year.
Unbelievable.
I saw one article comment on how his compensation was, quote, in line with what the CEOs of other major utilities made. But hey, newsflash, TVA is not a private utility. For one, the capital costs, the costs for the dams and the grid work were paid for by the taxpayers. Two, it doesn't compete to sell its product. It has pretty much an exclusive domain. Three, it's not regulated by state commissions. It doesn't have to appeal to the state commissions for rate increases. Four, it has among the highest expenses, excessive expenses, and electric rates that are higher than most every other utility. Five, the debt it does issue is backed by the government and they can finance it at a lower rate. There is simply no risk or challenge to running the TVA. It's a bureaucratic administrative position. You do pretty much what you want to with no fear of market consequences or competition.
Is TVA federal or is it state?
Yes, it's federal.
It's federal. Oh, because that was the what was it? The New Deal back or whatever it was back in
under Roosevelt.
Yes. Yep. Okay.
And it remains so today.
I have a problem when he's like he doesn't want stuff audited. I think
that was the treasurer.
Oh, that wasn't the TVA guy. Are you sure? Are you sure?
Yep.
I thought TVA was.
We're going to talk about him in just a minute too. Okay. We're on the same wavelength.
God.
So the government also is mandating that workers come back into the office, and there's some expectation that they will lose 30, 40, maybe 50% of the current employees who are working at home who just don't want to come back into the office. So have no idea what that number will be. Have no idea what the net impact of, Doge.
That package where they announced that they would pay them to September. So if they're pink slipping them, are they still getting that September package? Do we know? Or
I am not certain. If they are firing them for failure to do their job, they don't have to give them a severance package.
Correct. Yeah, under that. I don't know. It's pretty tempting just getting a free ride till September. If you could get something else,
I think most of them probably get the package just to be safe and quick and done with it, instead of trying to go through the legal hoops of, dismissing a.
Just type resign.
Yeah. And I have no idea how many are. Those numbers haven't been released yet. We ought to start getting some information coming out before long. So,
I had a friend text me and said, just FYI, government people are working from home. The contractors hired by the government have always had to come to the office.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, her family members of contractors. So, yeah, they've always had to come to the office. So that's probably who's in the office.
It's funny how, but this building was apparently empty.
Well, they might not have any contractors.
There was like nobody in the building. So they just took over the whole building and have locked everybody else out, which
I read in one of the buildings when the people started going back that there were like homeless people, like there were just people camping in there and whatever, that it was just a hot mess that People were just living in there because nobody had shown up in years.
Yeah. So looking at, many of the doomsayers' predictions or estimates for the impact of tariffs, like I say, they're looking at them in isolation. They're not looking at them in context of all the other, things going on. It's not easy to consider that, and that's one reason why I haven't given you any specific numbers. I've looked at the past, I can point out to those specifics, but in terms of the future, there's still a lot of balls in the air. Key point is with the tariffs, not everything will be taxed. Last time, critical imports were excluded or reduced. I expect more of the same. Cannot ignore the fact that the U.S. has vast potential to produce what it imports. Through regulations or cost savings, it chooses not to. And again, the cost savings, much of that from labor, is that still a factor with the ability to automate production and robotics and using, computers to design, do whatever? I'm thinking that the cost of manufacturing in the U.S. would be far less now than they would be 30, 40, 50 years ago, as compared to shipping everything over and having the transportation cost. Automation can greatly reduce the cost. And then currency and exchange rates. We've talked about that. China's under great economic pressure. They just simply can't lose much more production. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond to that.
So questions on the exchange rate. If we go to a pure digital currency, we wouldn't have exchange rate issues then, correct? If we just picked a whatever.
Still would.
Why?
Because most everything is digital now. In terms of the dollar, you're just moving digits on a computer. You pay somebody with digits.
But let's just say we all had Bitcoin. Why would there be an exchange rate if we're just doing it through Bitcoin?
If everybody's using the same,
that's what I mean.
Coin, there would not be. No, that's right. I was thinking if the yuan were digitized, the dollar was digitized.
No, I'm just saying.
Which is kind of what we got now. Yeah.
Yeah, if we all had Bitcoin or whatever, the need for exchange rates would be out the door.
No, but the exchange rate would be embedded in the difference in cost or price. Because the labor in China would still be far under American labor. So if the amount of labor were the same, you would pay less Bitcoin to have the product produced in China than you would have it produced in America.
Well, I guess.
So you still has a kind of an embedded exchange impact.
Well, and we'd still have transportation costs. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, in America, we can manufacture things without as much labor. With technology and automation, that kind of thing, for better or worse.
Well, you showed that port video on one of your videos, of your live streams, about shockingly how many, there's not that many people running the ports in China. So why wouldn't that fall over into other industries if they're doing it at the ports? Why
it absolutely could. Yeah, it absolutely could. There's some political realities in this country that you don't have in China. The unions. The same reason our ports aren't as automated, because the dock workers want to keep their jobs. So
unless it's Florida and they send in the National Guard.
Yeah.
It's a reality.
But it's coming.
What, did you think they're going to break the unions and just start, if they would have to? Do you think Trump would just do that and just send the National Guard to the ports?
No, I don't think he'll force the automation, but it'll probably be ingrained over time, because there are fewer and fewer Americans that want to be longshoremen.
Stevedores, yeah.
Yeah. So as those numbers dwindle, they will have to automate some of the task. Now, maybe keep some people on, legacy or whatever, instead of just laying them off or assign them some different responsibilities or oversight. But it's going to come. It's going to happen. So there's a lot of different balls in the air to consider if you're going to really say that tariffs are going to cause inflation. And I have trouble saying that it will. Like I say, to me, inflation is a systemic event. It's not necessarily based on individual price changes for individual goods. Now, if tariffs are put across the board, 11% of the GDP is imported. So you would expect an increase in 11% of the goods imported. That would be an initial shock. But as more and more of those goods were produced in the U.S., that would evaporate. As people use substitutes, that would reduce the effect. The attendant benefits of tax increases, regulatory cuts would increase their disposable income, lower their cost for other goods. What's the net effect? I think it would ultimately be very beneficial.
So back to my original question before. Is he going to use tariff to break BRICS because he's going to force them to start using the US dollar again for commodities, to buy commodities? Or do you think BRICS is here to stay?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up.
Look at that. It's like ESP. And no, he did not share the presentation with me beforehand, but Ellen and Clay know I have ESP. So, yeah.
Yes, that's working out pretty good. I have not killed any dandelions lately, so you should be sleeping peacefully.
It's winter. But, you're going to have to not kill them because you can eat them, because with the price of groceries the way they are now, you might have to be making your own.
You might have to start eating them.
Everyone, the 100% of the dandelions are edible. So that's our little joke from previous videos.
For those of y'all not familiar with BRICS, we've thrown that term out a couple times. BRICS is a international group or consortium of trade partners. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, Spain, who initially started the organization. Their goal was ultimately to try to do
no bugs, Melissa, no bugs.
Dandelion and bug salad for
I will not eat the bugs and like it.
No. Their goal has been to try to conduct trade in currencies other than the dollar. The Biden administration weaponized the dollar. It used the dollar particularly against Russia. Russia had billions of dollars in reserves in the U.S. dollar. The U.S. cut off access. It cut off access to the SWIFT network, which is how international trade was, paid for and accommodated, the network that transfers all the dollars from different banks. Just did several things and weaponized the dollar against Russia. Well, we had never done this before against any country. That's one thing that made countries feel safe using the dollar. They didn't have to worry about it being used as leverage against them. So BRICS' stated goal has been to try to come up with some other currency to do international trade in. Well, Trump fired a hell of a shot across their bow the other day, declaring that any country working to replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency will face 100% tariffs of 100% on their goods imported to the U.S.
I did not hear that. When did he do that? He's been doing so much.
2 or 3 days ago. Yeah.
Oh boy. Oh, I was busy 3 days ago. Okay.
Yeah. And this is huge for the core of BRICS and most countries, but 44 countries have applied for membership to BRICS. Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia went off the dollar. We had a 50-year treaty with them to where they sold oil only in dollars.
I know.
They refused to renew that treaty this past year. So they're now using euros or yuan and dollars to trade oil. But for the core of BRICS, who we'll focus on, the U.S. is by far their largest trading partner. Now, Russia gets around Western sanctions by going through China, India, other countries, but it's still a big trading partner. So how will they respond?
God, how are we going to get vodka? My God.
Yeah.
Hey, you need that for herbal tinctures. I'm just saying.
We
Polish vodka.
Ukrainian vodka.
Polish vodka.
French vodka. Isn't Grey Goose French? Yeah.
Grey Goose is French. I get Polish some Polish
and
vodka.
Then Tito's. Isn't that American?
It's not the one I use. But anyway, yeah.
No. Well, I was just thinking that the guy that developed Tito's got divorced. His wife knew the formula, and so she started making her own line using the exact same formula. And I forget the name of it. But now Tito's, and it's a cheaper bottle if you find, anyway.
Well, Russians use potatoes. So, I mean, they should be making that vodka up there in Idaho there. Idaho vodka.
So, how will that impact them? That's a hell of a hammer to drop on them. I mean, India, China, Spain, their number one trading partner is the U.S. Brazil, we're 2 or 3. Russia, we're way up there. So that's a hell of a hammer. It'll be interesting to see how they respond. How will they respond? Expect more negotiations. The art of the deal. Trump establishes an initial position with a sledgehammer, gets them to the table, and they work out a deal. We'll see how that goes. The main thing they're concerned about, having the dollar used against them, weaponizing the dollar against them.
Me too. I don't think that was right. Yeah. I mean, I get it, but I don't get it.
It's a legit concern. If you're Russian or whatever, that would be a legit concern. So they'll likely want, I imagine, they would want assurances, guarantees that will not happen again. If the U.S. is displeased with their policies.
But they could get around it with Bitcoin, right? If they chose to use Bitcoin, could you get around it that way?
Yeah, and there is some movement towards adopting Bitcoin. China and Russia are both selling oil in Bitcoin now, giving it a trial run, see how it works. So I think that ultimately will be
the end.
I kind of see a bright future for Bitcoin. I think it will be a backbone. I don't think it'll be a day-to-day currency, but I think it'll be a backbone for the banking system, international trade. So it's just cheaper.
Afraid that they shut it off. Like you don't comply like they did in Canada. You don't comply, they'll shut or even China, right? They shut you off when you don't comply.
Well, China tried to outlaw it 3 times and failed each time because you can access it so many different ways. It was actually designed where, you remember those old simple Nokia flip phones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can access it and trade it using one of those old school flip phones. So you don't need the internet. You don't need to go through a commercial regulated bank. There's a lot of different ways to access and trade it that governments can't control. That's why they hate it so much.
So there's no way they could shut you off.
No, they can make it a little bit more awkward, but they can't shut you off.
So you could still have your funds unless so there's no way they can shut it off or shut it off at a business?
Nope. They could make it illegal for a business to take it. But if the business is smart, there's no way the government could really determine that they were taking it.
What about the IRS? Couldn't they figure that out?
No, the way the IRS figures it out, like Silk Road, Ross Ulbricht was just pardoned the other day.
Yes.
The way they caught him was he was, his website, Silk Road, was taking all the transactions in Bitcoin.
Right.
And they couldn't find him. But one time Ross posted he needed help coding. It was on a different website. Oh. I forget the exact details, but he posted, he needed help, and he used the same email address he did for Silk Road.
I gotcha.
And yeah, they found out what his login was, and that's how they found him, identified him. If he'd have just stayed within the Silk Road shell and using Bitcoin, they would have never found him. The way they find most people is
find you if you owe money. At some point, they will find you.
Yeah, the way they track people is most people open up their Bitcoin account through their bank account. And so they can see that transfer to Bitcoin system. They can see the number used to set it up, and then they can track transactions from that.
So you're saying an offshore bank account is the way to access the BRICS. Okay. Or Switzerland? Would Switzerland still have the laws to protect you, or are they
Switzerland and the Caymans actually now transfer all the information to the IRS?
I knew it. There's no way. That's how they always get you. That's how they got Al Capone and all these mobs. They can't get you on anything else, but you don't pay a penny in taxes on your ill-gotten gains. They got you.
There are ways to do it. I don't really want to go into those.
No, we won't talk about that. Okay. I was just saying there's certain countries.
And for large amounts of cash, it's really, really difficult or virtually impossible. That's one reason why the cartels don't use Bitcoin, because their main problem is in getting rid of tons of cash. And it's just not. Yeah.
Do they use paper? Or do we know if that's what they're using? I'm just curious now you brought that up.
Well, all of their transactions are in cash. The street dealers sell in cash. They buy from their upstream in cash. The upstream buys from the supplier in cash. The upstream pays the cartels in cash.
All paper.
So it's all cash. Did you ever see the series Narcos? It's on Netflix. It's a pretty good series, but it shows
Miami Vice. Isn't it like Miami Vice?
Well, Narcos goes into how particularly Escobar, how he started the first cartel, but it shows, them having so much cash, they literally were putting it in barrels and burying it in fields.
Oh, like on Breaking Bad, they bought the car wash so that they could launder the cash through the car wash with the, the cash. So, yeah. Oh, look, thank you. Thank you for your sale. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, here's a car wash that has 2 million cars a year going through it,
Well, it's on the TV show.
Yeah. But that's the problem with cash is it's really hard to launder high volumes of it. And the cartels were getting $200 million a day and just could not process it all. And this was back in the 80s when $200 million was actually a fair amount of money.
You mean you could afford to buy eggs then?
Yeah. So BRICS, there's a crack in the wall, and we'll see what happens. But that's a hell of a sledgehammer. Anybody have any questions on the tariffs? I pretty much hogged the conversation here. So if you got some questions, throw them up. DeepSeek, kind of our second topic of the night, and I'll try to be a little bit quicker with this. Most people have seen the headlines, huge waves with the announcement of the DeepSeek AI system. It was so impactful that Nvidia dropped $600 billion in market value in one day.
On the 27th, earlier this week.
to put that in context, that's more than the entire value of Exxon. And you look at something like that, and it's like, what the hell happened? Well, DeepSeek is basically a Chinese AI startup, and it released a model, DeepSeek R1, which was developed at a fraction of the cost of similar models from the Western counterparts, OpenAI, Grok, Meta. The model was trained using 2000 Nvidia H800 chips. Now, the H800 is an export version of the H100, so it's slower. It's a more restricted chip. But even doing that, even using this older chip, it demonstrated impressive performance in reasoning tasks, in coding, and knowledge-based questions. In fact, it outperformed many U.S. Systems. The really cool
that the reason they could do that is because they were using like the game controller technology, because you buy a game controller, and they said that when you want to continue to buy games, even though the games are newer, the graphics get better, and that's how they were able to use the older chips to get that performance.
Yep. I don't understand exactly how they structured the hardware, or linked it all together, but they were using older technology and
chips,
put it together and trained it for a fraction of the cost of American AI systems. They reportedly trained the system for about $5.5 million, which
so Clay, how did they do it so cheaply? If it cost $1 billion, how did they do it cheaper?
Well, yeah, keep in mind that the American systems their training costs are running in the billions.
Yeah.
So how did they do it? Basically, the the operating theory is that they simply accessed OpenAI and Meta and ported over their data.
Wow, Mark Zuckerberg must be big mad. They stole it from Meta.
Yeah, the U.S. companies spent hundreds of billions of dollars building and training these systems, and then DeepSeek basically spent time accessing them and porting over the data transferred. So
how does Sam Altman feel about that now that he's in charge of Project Stargate?
He's mad. He's arguing that DeepSeek stole the information, which is ironic because OpenAI, ChatGPT, basically stole the information from individuals on the internet without compensating them. In fact, there's a number of lawsuits going on where individuals are suing AI for using their material without compensation.
Did you see that whole thing going on in Great Britain where they want to be like the AI capital of the world or whatever? And the people would have to know to opt out, but they're not going to tell them unless they know to opt out. And artists and stuff are coming out like, so you mean to tell me if AI plagiarized my stuff, there would be no one to sue? So I don't own the intellectual property to my work now or my art?
Yep.
So that's sort of what you're saying ChatGPT did, is they stole from everyone.
Yeah, they're arguing that it's out on the internet. It's open domain. And that's what's going to court. So, and to me, kind of summing it up, the beauty of it all, if I can refer to this as beauty, is that ChatGPT lost its job to AI. Think about that for a minute.
Sam's got a new job. He's going to run Stargate now, so we're fine. He's fine.
Yeah, some people think that Stargate won't happen now because DeepSeek showed or gave insight on how to do it cheaper using old technology.
Yeah, the game controller technology. Yeah, the game box technology.
But
Well, and it's less energy. So, I mean, at least now they won't, destroy our grid. But how does that make Elon feel when he's building those big data centers, and all the energy to support the data centers?
Well, see, I'm glad you asked that, because, giving it some thought and, trying to figure out what the future direction of AI is. Did DeepSeek really fundamentally change? Get your crystal ball out.
Yes, that's how I did my accruals.
Some people are like you saw Nvidia's stock drop $600 billion in one day.
I know.
Huge, massive. Some people are like, the whole way we're doing AI is wrong. And I'm kind of like, no, we're not. And so I'm going to throw out some predictions and understand this is not my specific field, but just trying to look at things modestly, rationally. DeepSeek has shown that they can clone any other AI. They can clone their product surface. Their product surface is how you interact with it. Their user interface, the algorithms that allow for real-time data analysis, the image recognition, all of these kind of things. They can clone it. They can copy it. The Chinese have been masters for years at copying things and reproducing things cheaper. That's what they're doing here. I believe before long, they will even produce their own quote unquote output operator. It's operator. OpenAI has a $200 a month system called Operator. I kind of expect DeepSeek to release their version of Operator soon, and it'll be free. So everything they offer will be free.
They would have to harvest your data, right? So buried in the terms of service, you're basically giving them your computer, right? That's my guess. It'll be buried in the terms of service that they will now have access to all your data. So if they're on the phone, they would have your phone data so that they can harvest to the AI.
Yeah, that's why one big reason DeepSeek is free. It makes it damn sexy to have the same capability that you're paying ChatGPT for. The key is that DeepSeek is spyware. It monitors your inputs and your outputs. It monitors your keystrokes, like your passwords. It keeps your data. You can't delete it. All of your data. And you can't delete it. It owns your data.
Does the rest of them own your data if you use it?
No. American companies, no. Any disputes you have with DeepSeek, legal disputes, have to be settled in Chinese courts. So good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck.
The U.S. Navy has already banned use of DeepSeek.
That's my company, yeah.
And the government probably isn't far behind, possibly even blocking its widespread use.
Like TikTok, and then they put it back.
Right. Well, TikTok, I think, is going to have to be forced sold to an American or Canadian.
Elon will buy it, right?
Yeah. Who's the Canadian? Kevin O'Leary. He's offered $20 billion for it.
Really? Mr. Wonderful. Oh.
Yeah. So if he gets a hold of it, I think he'll rip out most of the spyware. But
you would have to be compliant. So
yeah.
So so Trump just gave them like a little reprieve. So
yeah, 90 days, I believe.
There was some panic there for a weekend. There's a lot of panic going on.
Yeah, and Trump doesn't want to ban it because TikTok actually ended up helping his campaign win.
Yes.
There were so many younger members of society who use TikTok, who actually used it to help support his campaign and spread the word.
Thank you, Barron
So
Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, he is favorably inclined to it, but I think he understands the ownership needs to change and the security needs to improve.
So, I also think he understands now the internet, like the other ones didn't. Like, people get their news from podcasts now, from YouTube, from independent, rather than these agencies. So just seeing him on all those different shows was pretty interesting.
Yep.
And how will on your show?
How will it end up impacting Nvidia, which is kind of the key. So, the first response was that, you don't need Nvidia's extremely expensive top tier chips. I don't think that's the case. I think they're probably even more necessary now. Nvidia will continue selling chips. Everyone initially panicked, but the thing is, what DeepSeek taught the American firms is that they have real competition. And I firmly believe that the American competitors have an attitude that they can't afford to lose the race for AI.
I don't think you can.
The incentive not to lose is dominant. It will allow any expense to avoid the catastrophic risk of not winning, the catastrophic risk of being late or too slow in this field. Notice that no American company, that's announced support for Stargate has explored or considered or even announced pulling out. They simply must win. To do that,
Clay, it's now. I mean, eventually AI is going to do everything. Rise of the machines, but it's true. I mean, even farming now is just reading in the farm newspaper about how John Deere's tractors now, they can retrofit them into AI to run themselves. So they're self-driven because, again, with the farms to harvest and stuff, they can put the technology in. You can program it with the satellites and GPS, and it can do all of the work in the field. So one farmer could technically manage 10,000 acres. So you need the AI and the AI developments with that. So I agree. I don't think we can afford, or any country really can afford to lose the AI race.
So, they've simply got a mindset that they must win. And so they will spend anything they need or have in order to win that race. Now, additionally, yesterday, we also found out that the FBI has started to investigate DeepSeek and Nvidia.
But wasn't Nvidia already under investigation for something?
For some accounting irregularities.
That's what I thought.
But this is violating export control laws. They're investigating what's known as the Singapore backdoor. Nvidia's largest export market has been to Singapore companies in Singapore. But there's only one problem. Singapore has no AI development companies. So it appears on the surface that Nvidia has been selling to Chinese shell companies or front companies.
After the ban, while it's banned?
Yeah. So, China has come a long way. DeepSeek shows they've come a long way, but they have one extremely critical handicap in this race. China cannot manufacture the chips. If they can't secure the latest and greatest in the hardware, it makes it really tough for them to be a competitor in the future. It really limits their ability to improve.
What can't they get? I mean, China can clone and do anything. So why are you saying they can't manufacture the chips? What raw materials can't they get to make the chips?
It's not raw materials. They haven't mastered the technology. It's so advanced, so technical, so specialized that it is being very well guarded. and they have not yet been able to come close to producing those types of chips.
And they're only made in the U.S.?
And Taiwan. It's one reason why they want Taiwan.
Well, they won't go there now. Trump's in office, so.
Yeah. And also, I mean, let's be real. If China did make a move on Taiwan, one of the first things we would do is blow the hell out of the semiconductor plants. Just cannot literally afford to allow them to take control of that technology.
So we would blow up our own allies' factories before.
Yes, to ensure that they were not captured.
I think Trump would drop more than that, but yeah.
Probably.
Crazy, no crazy way. You know that.
I expect to see far greater restrictions on chip exports. Melissa, talking about TikTok, I think he's the one who wanted to ban it in the first place.
Well, that's before he,
That's before he got educated.
Before his youngest educated him on the internet.
Yep, that's true. So
hey, I don't want to bring up that controversial topic. Never mind.
That's all right. So I still expect Nvidia to sell chips. There are still some things I'm hesitant involving the company. Some of it's accounting, some of it's books, some of these export things. But the likelihood is that Nvidia will still sell a bunch of chips going forward.
Would they sell the older chips to let's talk this.
They have export versions they can sell to China, but they're usually 4 or 5 generations out.
But we know now, we think that they're getting the newer stuff.
Or close to it, yeah. Some other news going on in AI. OpenAI, the company that runs ChatGPT, has for years stated they weren't into robotics. Well, just this past week, they started running ads for robotics engineers. They're hiring robotics engineers at starting salary of $380,000 a year. Yep.
Are they trying to get the Boston Scientific people, or the ones that are doing it for X?
They're going for anybody. I don't know if they're targeting anybody in specific, but that's not altogether unattractive starting wage.
Ooh. Because those robots at Boston Dynamics are pretty scary.
Yep, and just keep getting better. There's a little company, a little boutique shop called Hyperbolic Labs in San Francisco. It's a small shop, and they rent out GPUs. So if your company or firm has a complex computing problem and doesn't want to buy a $50 million computer to run it, you can rent the time from Hyperbolic Labs, kind of like cloud computing, so to speak.
Wow.
Well, they announced this past week they are seeing AI autonomous agents renting their GPUs. Now, you ask, what's an autonomous agent?
The machines.
It's the machines. Autonomous agents are basically code that can make decisions on its own. It can learn on its own. It can start seeking out data it wants to process. It doesn't require human oversight to perform its task. Autonomous agents have the ability to perceive their environment. They can use sensors like cameras or speakers or microphones to input data to analyze their environment. This can allow them to understand context and react appropriately. So increasingly, these autonomous agents are designed to learn from their experience, either through like reinforcement, where they get feedback on their actions, or through other forms of machine learning that allow them to improve their performance over time. So they are specifically designed with specific goals or tasks in mind, and then kind of given some freedom in how to achieve it. So these autonomous agents are now out in the wild, as it's referred to.
So Terminator's the next movie night.
Yeah. Seriously.
Oh my God, that is scary that the machines now are renting time. So where are they getting the funds to pay for it? Like, what human accountant is saying, okay, this is okay to pay this bill?
Well, most autonomous agents will generally end up providing a service that can be billed, and they can even track their own sales, receipts, and direct payments as necessary.
But there still has to be a human bean counter that approves it.
Well, you know, somebody somewhere up the chain a year, 2 years ago approved it, and now they're out running.
That's my next job. I'm going to be the one that stops the AI, because I'm going to be the human that approves it until it like kills me. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, most people were thinking we really wouldn't have autonomous agents for years. Well, they're out. They are out and existing.
Oh my God. I'm going to have nightmares tonight. Thank you. I still think the bean counters will save the planet if you know that they have to approve the transactions, approve the money. Once you give the autonomous free reign with the money and approving the money, that's it.
Yeah, that's where we are.
Jesus.
And we already talked about earlier about AI being better at reading X-rays and MRIs. There's actually the first case, the curiosity arose because there was a father whose son injured his hand, took him to the ER, and the ER doctor told him that it was just a sprain. There was no fracture. Well, the father, you know, was given the X-ray and ended up digitizing it and sending it to Grok. Grok came back saying there is a fracture. So the father took the X-ray and his son to a specialist. And the specialist looked at the X-ray and said, yes, it's definitely a fracture. So they were able to, you know, reset it, tweak it, whatever, put it in a cast. The boy did not need surgery, but if they had waited months and the fracture healed, he would have ultimately needed surgery. So now you've got a lot of medical professionals and others experimenting with AI's ability to interpret raw medical inputs, MRIs, X-rays, lab results, and return diagnosis. So,
well, see, now there's HIPAA involved. How do you secure the HIPAA? If the AI is sucking that up and using it, how, you know, where is your privacy? How is that maintaining HIPAA controls?
Well, the information is fed with no personal identifiers. It's just generic medical information or hypothetical medical information.
And when the autonomous agents track it back to your phone, they know who it is. I'm just saying, you know it's coming.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Some of this is definitely a little scary. And speaking of scary, this next section is not for the faint of heart. If you are sensitive, you may want to skip this or turn off your speaker. But in the past, we have not talked about organoid intelligence. This is the use of actual organs or cells of living creatures to serve as the central processor. So you can probably see where this is going now. In this, you know, newly emerging technology, they take stem cells and encourage them to develop into brain cells. So basically growing brain cells in a petri dish. And they connect microelectrodes to the growth of cells and then use a computer to train them. What they found is they actually end up outperforming AI, learning quicker and obviously far more energy efficient. So it's kind of similar to the brain function of an unborn baby, a huge capacity to learn and adapt.
Do you think they could use it to where people have spinal cord injuries to train it to reroute the signals so people could walk again? Or that's not what they want it for. They want it for the computing power.
There is just no telling.
Oh, geez.
I honestly am not familiar enough with some of the science and the neurology behind it to know. But here's a company called Final Spark, interesting choice of name, that allows you to rent out these brains.
Jesus.
It gets worse.
I'm already having nightmares from the agents. Now you're telling me that. Oh my God. Okay, keep going.
Brains, actually, I should have had this loaded up. Let's hold on a second here.
We can't hear it. Is there a speaker?
Yeah, I'll probably have to restart it to get the speaker working.
Okay.
The butterfly you see moving here is controlled by that brain.
Is that a real? That's an electronic one, or
Yep.
Oh my God.
There's the mini human brain and the electrodes attached to it.
So how is this? So this is working autonomously, unlike with the implant chip that Elon was developing, the Neuralink. This is different. You're doing this outside. So basically, it's another form of AI that can control things.
Yeah, you can basically control the direction or whatever. See this little hand? You can log in to the site, and if somebody else is not doing it, and move it around, and the butterfly will chase you. The thing is, the question is, and unconfirmed, but do these brains, these growing, emerging brains, have a conscious, just like our brains do? Do they think?
Rights. Well, here's the thing.
Do they think? Hold on. Do they think they're the butterfly, and do they feel what the butterfly feels? If, and you're shaking your head, yes. If so, then you've just made a good argument that we are nothing more than organoid brains in a simulation.
Yes. But here's the thing. We're in the Matrix, yes. But what rights would they have? At this point, they have feelings. They are no longer tissue. We realize they are sentient beings now, right? With that being said, are they now our slaves, or do we at some point they evolve to the point where we have to give them rights?
Nobody has, made the argument that they do have feelings or senses or rights.
They should. I mean, if they have feeling, it's a brain. Yeah. It's a brain.
Because we really don't know. Like, I can sit here and imagine closing my hand into a fist, and then I do it.
Right.
We have no idea what a thought is made of, what my consciousness is made up of, how it works, how I can take some conscious thought and convert it into physical action. We don't understand that.
Well,
we don't really know if these organoids have that consciousness or don't know. It's an interesting point. But, are we just organoid brains in a simulation in the Matrix?
Of course we are. Let's go.
So is that enough internet for the day?
That's too much internet for the day.
Let me show you one other quick thing. And I thought this was kind of cool. You're familiar, if you've watched the channel, you're familiar with the debt clock, the website, US Debt Clock. Well, I noticed the other day, because I check it every once in a while, they have added a Doge clock showing the savings that Doge has secured so far. And in a little over a week, Doge has already secured $46 billion in savings.
No, it's insane.
Now, if you do the math on that, that comes out to $2.4 trillion a year.
It's still not slowing the other clock down, the debt clock down.
No, but it, because the debt clock's in trillions. But if this keeps up for now, to start off, they can get some low hanging fruit.
Right.
But, if they can save $1 trillion this next year or find ways to cut $1 trillion for the next fiscal year, that'll be huge. So I'll be watching this closely.
I think we all will. Well, that's okay. The autonomous agents can do a lot of the job that the government was doing anyway, right? So then you're just not paying people, because we could just have autonomous agents, for the IRS just doing that for us.
Yep. It's coming.
Seriously, it's funny, but it's not funny. I think there's a lot of things that they could probably automate. I've been seeing, posts on X where people are saying, the ones that are in the office working, that their filing system for a lot of these agencies are still paper filing systems or rudimentary systems based in Access from like when somebody wrote the program in 1980, and they're not making those changes.
Yep.
So, here we go. My friend texts, why don't we just have autonomous agents for Congress?
There's an argument to be made there.
Yes, Martha, that was a good argument.
So, all right, that was just something I wanted to throw out. We've run a little bit long. Anybody have any questions, comments? Really do appreciate y'all being with us tonight. Jane, really appreciate you, pinch hitting and doing an outstanding job for E-Train. If you are still on, you have been missed. Hope everything is improving with the unpacking, and hope you get your internet connected soon. But if you have any questions or something strikes you after the show, email me, moffatonmoney@gmail.com, or Twitter, follow us, give me a follow at Moffat on Money, or DM me there. If there are no other questions or comments, I will probably go grab some dinner.
Yes.
So really, thank you all for being with us. Look forward to seeing you again Tuesday night, where we have Tuesday night Q&A. So if you got some questions and want to, discuss them, then we take questions on most anything. Hope y'all have a great rest of the weekend. Blessings to you all. Our time is up. We thank you for yours. Good night, everyone.